everyone, it's Alice, and today we are talking about the books I read in May. I finished my exams this month, so a lot of time got sucked into that, but now I'm done, and I have a little bit of a break before I start my final year of my bachelor's, which is exciting, and I feel like I have so much free time now, like I don't really know what to do with myself. Obviously, I still have to work, but I just feel very free, and I don't really know what to do with that, but I guess I will probably fill most of that time with reading. We're here to talk about what I read in the previous month though, so let's get into that. This reading month was a little bit of like a mixed bag. It went really up and down, but I actually read two five-star reads this month, which is unheard of for me because I am very stingy with my five-star ratings, but somehow managed to read two of those, so that's exciting. I also read some other books that I didn't like as much, but we'll get into all of that, and let's just start with the first book that I finished in May, which was Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. This is historical fiction fantasy with a little bit of romance to it, and it's set in Transylvania, and I think maybe it's set in like the 1600s. I can't remember if it's actually specified, but it's set like back in the day. And we meet these five sisters who live in this castle with their father, and they are very happy there, and they are especially happy on the nights of the full moon when they get to go through this portal that they have found in the castle, which will take them to the other kingdom where they can dance the night away with the Fae. But then things take a turn because their father is quite ill and he has been advised to travel away for his health for the winter. And that should be fine, but then this cousin of theirs starts coming in and thinking that he should be in charge of everything. And then one of the sisters also meets this person in the other kingdom that she falls in love with, and everything just gets very complicated. I was really excited to read this book because I wanted to read something else by this author. I read a book by her many years ago now, and I remember I enjoyed it, but then I never read anything again, and so I wanted to get back into her books. So I picked this one up, and I'm so glad I did because I really, really enjoyed this one. I love stories that have fairy tale elements to them, and I especially love stories that deal with like fae and fairies in this particular way where there's like another kingdom, and I love seeing that world and our world sort of get mixed together, and like it feels so magical and enchanting in this book. And I like that not everything is like super light and fluffy with the fairies either. There's some darkness there and some strange things, and I just really like how that comes together. I also love the setting of this castle. It's set by these like magical woods, and all of that is just so atmospheric. I would say that this is in a lot of ways a coming of age story. We follow mainly the second eldest sister, and the story is a lot about her having to come into herself and sort of fight for herself and for her rights and the rights of her sisters and her sort of place, and I really enjoyed following her on that journey. And I do also love that at the center of the story we follow this group of siblings, and I just really like stories about sisters and siblings, so I really love that in here. Not everyone in this family is great though. Like when I tell you that I wanted to strangle this freaking cousin, oh my god, he was so frustrating to read about. He comes in and he's so condescending and he's just like a little shit, and I hate him. And in hindsight, I think that maybe he could have been a more well-rounded villain, but he really, like, I got very heated when I read this book because I just thought he was so annoying and just like the worst kind of man. And he really made me feel a lot of things, and it does work in a way because it really makes you root for the main character. The story had some twists and turns that I didn't see coming, which I really enjoyed, and overall it felt like a very magical and enjoyable read, but I also appreciated that I really cared about the characters. It is a YA book because the main character is a teenager, but it doesn't feel super YA, and even though there is romance in here, and that is sort of like a big part of the story, there is a lot of other stuff going on as well, and I really liked that. I also loved the frog companion that we meet in here, and some of you had told me that I was gonna love him, and I did. I also just really liked the writing in here. It felt magical and enchanting, and I felt really sucked into it, and I felt like I could picture this whole world. And I think that the story has a lot of elements to it that I just really like in books, and that worked really well for me. For me, this is a 4 out of 5 star read. I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to be reading more from this author because I found this very magical. I have Daughter of the Forest, I think it's called, on my shelves waiting for me, so I think that will be my next read by this author. But I think she's written quite a lot of books, and I can see myself making my way through all of them. Secondly, I picked up Hunger by Choi Jin-Young, which is a contemporary fiction horror-ish novel, and it follows this woman who basically finds her soulmate dead in the street, and she decides to take him home and eat him. So the story is in part about that, but also in part about their relationship and how they got there, I guess. So I was intrigued by this because of the premise, because it sounds a little crazy, but then also in part because of this cover. I'm not gonna lie to you, the cover is really good. And I was just interested in reading it. It's also a translated book, so that's cool. And I don't know if I really expected anything from this. These kinds of books can go two ways for me. And to be honest, in the end, I didn't really feel or think very much of this, which is kind of crazy when this is what it's about. I think one of the problems with this for me was that I didn't really feel connected to the characters and I wasn't that interested in them. It was just sort of like a mild interest. And then this is also a romance book because it's about these people who love each other and they're also kind of obsessed with each other, and their dynamic is very strange. But I think for me, when I don't care about the characters, it's also hard to care about their dynamic. And even though I don't read a lot of romance books and I'm not usually like super into them, when it's weird like this, I can get into it. But for this, I just felt a sort of mild interest in the characters, and that wasn't really enough. Obviously, there is the cannibalism element in here as well, which I guess is interesting. It's very much that thing of being so obsessed with someone that you want to consume them. And I guess that was disturbing, but it also wasn't as disturbing as I thought it was going to be. The book has a sort of fever dream vibe to it, and those parts definitely have that to it as well. And I don't know if that really worked for me. It is an unsettling read in a lot of ways, but I don't know if I really understand what it was trying to do, and if it was trying to do what I think it was trying to do. It was not particularly original, I guess. And there is something about the writing as well that didn't quite work for me. I think I'm not a huge fan of like experimental writing. And even though the writing in here is not like too experimental, it might just be a little like that didn't work for me with this story, I guess. It's a weird one for sure, but I think for me and the kind of reader I am, I really needed to connect to the characters in here, or at least feel like I understood them. And the narrative jumps around quite a lot as well. And so things are a little bit up in the air, and there is something about the writing that feels a little bit detached. And even though there were like sentences in here and parts in here that were beautifully constructed, that's not enough for me. So I don't really know what to rate this. It's maybe like a 2 star read, 2, 3 stars, probably more like 2. And yeah, it just kind of wasn't for me. I do think this cover is still excellent though. Like the cover design is on point. Then I read The Everlasting by Alix E. Harrow, and this is like a fantasy sci-fi romance type book, and it follows the story of this former soldier who is now a scholar, a sort of struggling scholar, and he is obsessed with the tale of Una Everlasting. And her stories from 1,000 years ago are legend where he lives, and through various events, he basically gets sent back in time to meet her. And the story is about them getting tangled up in time together. It's hard to really summarize this book, but I have mentioned before that I love a good time travel situation, and this has one of my favorite versions of that. Anyways, I went into this book and I was very excited to read it because I'd heard a lot of great things, and I also read Starling House by this author and I loved that book, so I was very excited to read this, but I don't think I was prepared for how much I was gonna love it. Like, this was amazing. There must be something about the way this author writes that just really gets to me, even though I can't totally put my finger on what it is. I love the way she creates characters and crafts worlds, and in this one in particular, I really like the way that she structured the story and how it moved along. And I don't know, there's just something about it that pulls me in. There were also some twists and turns in this book that I did not see coming at all. I hadn't looked too much into this before I read it, so maybe that helped, but there was a lot in here that I did not see coming. I do think that this maybe starts off a little slow, but I actually really liked that in here. I feel like it makes sense with where we're going, that it is a little bit slow in the beginning, and I think I also kind of like a slow beginning. I know it's not for everyone, but for some stories, I think it really works and it makes sense to me that it's like that in here. I really enjoyed being introduced to the characters and having this world established, and we see both the current day world and the past. And there's just something about the way this author writes and like the atmosphere that she creates that I really enjoy. I loved it in Starling House, and even though the atmosphere in that book is very different than it is in this one, there was something about like the whole atmosphere that I just love it. There is a love story in here that's a big part of the story, and I think the reason it works for me in here is because I was really invested in the characters and I really liked reading about them. I was interested in them, and because of that, I was also interested in this romance and I understood it, and I just loved it. I also really like, it's kind of hard to talk about without spoiling this book, but I liked how we got to see them in different times, and I like that. I sort of like the way that it builds up. I also love how the whole book has a feeling of myth to it, which really makes a lot of sense because myths and legends and history and the impact of it is like a major theme in this book. And I just really liked that we sort of got to see behind the curtain of some of these legends. Like, it was so good. I think this won't work for every reader, but for me, who loves this particular kind of time thing and who likes sort of slower books and slower burns and who apparently loves this kind of writing for whatever reason, I can't help but give this 5 stars. Like, I just loved it. And that does mean that I've given both of the books that I've read by this author 5 stars, because I also gave 5 stars to Starling House. I think maybe that book is still my favorite, but they are very, very close, and I don't know what it is. It's very hard to pinpoint like why I love these books so much, but I just do. And I do love this theme of like legend and what it's being used for in the current day. Like, that whole thing was just excellent. Second to last, I picked up The Library at Hellebore by Cassandra Khaw, which is a fantasy horror book, and it's set at this Institute for the Gifted where the powerfully dangerous are sent. So different like teenagers and stuff with immense powers are sent there, and the goal of the school is to make them into proper people. But that's not actually what the school is for, because on graduation day, some of the students end up barricading themselves within the library because it turns out that the faculty actually just wants to eat all of them. For a book this gory and kind of horrific, I actually don't have that much to say about this book. I don't really know what I expected when I went into this. I had like an idea of the premise, and there was more body horror in here than I had expected, but I don't know, this felt kind of like meh to me. As a reader, again, who really loves reading about characters, I do just really struggle when I don't feel connected to the characters or I don't feel invested in them. And that is very much the case in here as well. And I think that this is like one of my main issues in some books, is that I don't feel like a connection to the characters. And I think for some people who prefer like plot over characters, this isn't an issue. But it is an issue for me because I'm not that kind of reader. And so, again, I just sort of felt like a mild interest in these people because they had some interesting powers, but all of them felt kind of flat to me. The narrative is also a little bit chaotic, I think. It jumps forwards and backwards a lot, and even though there is a lot of detail and we get to learn about different things in the different chapters, it wasn't structured in a way where I felt like I got a full understanding of the world or like the people in it. I felt like I have a baseline understanding of what is going on and what it is, but I didn't feel like there was a lot of depth to it that I could find, at least. There are some things that I do like about this though. I really like the very, very dark atmosphere in this book. I really like the academic setting, and I do think some of the magical stuff is like interesting, but it feels very much to me like the kind of book that you read and you just forget about, which is actually a little bit surprising to me because there are some really horrible scenes in here that you would think would like stick in my mind, but I don't think they will. I also don't know if I really like the writing in here, but that's just personal preference. I do think that the concept of the story is actually really cool, but I didn't love the execution of it. So for me, this is a 2 out of 5 star read, and I don't have that much more to say about it. Because I didn't like that book as much as I hoped I would, I felt like I didn't fully get to scratch the dark academia itch that I had at the time. And so the last book that I ended up reading was The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door by H.G. Parry. This is a historical fiction fantasy book, and it starts off in 1920, where we meet our main character, who is a commoner with no connections and no magical blood, but she ends up getting into a school for magic. And the reason that she wants to go to that school is to help her brother, who in World War One, he was a part of like a Faerie attack, and he was one of the very few survivors of that attack. And even though he survived, he's still cursed. So the main character wants to find a cure for this curse. She ends up going to the school, and when she's there, she meets a group of other students who are also interested in fairy magic and studying fairy magic, even though it is now illegal because after that fairy attack during World War One, all of the fairy doors were closed. Just the setup of that in and of itself really ticks a lot of boxes for me. I love books set in the 1920s. I love books with academic settings. I love books where we follow a group of friends. And I love books where we have these kinds of fairies, where the fairies are kind of like tricksters. So all of these things together was just like the perfect storm for me. Firstly, the whole atmosphere of this book was just excellent to me. I especially love the setting of this school. It feels very magical and mythic, and I loved following the main character as she discovers this world. I also love the whole thing about fairies and fae and that kind of like magic system, even though we don't delve like super deep into it. The book does shift about halfway through, where we have a pretty significant time jump. So in the first part of the book, we're following the main characters when they're in their late teens and still at school, obviously. And then after that time jump, they're a little bit older. And when I got to that part, I was a little bit worried that I wasn't gonna like it because sometimes those kinds of time jumps don't work for me. But I actually quite liked it in this one. I do think that the atmosphere and the vibe changes a little bit, and I think that I probably loved it a little bit more in the beginning of the book. But I did actually like where the story went with that whole time jump and everything that happens with that. I do also just really like the characters in here. Like I mentioned, I love following a group of friends, and I really liked meeting them and getting to know them, and I really liked following our main character. She's an interesting person, and the story is sort of told as if she's telling us these things in hindsight, so when she's older and all of this is past, and sometimes she will make like comments like, if I knew this then, or if I was totally honest with myself back then, I would have thought. And I think that that added a lot of reflection to her character. And I think that worked quite well because sometimes she makes some choices that are maybe a little bit questionable. And I actually really like that because I like reading about complicated characters. And she's not necessarily unreliable, but she's not always like totally honest, and I actually kind of like that. I also really like how this book explores academia and some of those themes. There are themes in here that are common for like the dark academia genre, although I guess you can't really call it a genre, but a lot of the themes that pop up in these kinds of books do also pop up in here, and I really like that. I also really like that war and grief are like huge themes in the story. Now, all of that being said, it's not the perfect book. It does have some minor flaws. And without going into spoilers, I do think that there are some things that are a little bit predictable. Some things are not explored as in depth as maybe they could have been. And I do think that the pacing of the story changes pretty drastically after that time jump. We go from a slower burn of a book to like it's much faster paced, and I think for some readers that can be very jarring. But to be honest, when I got to that point, I was so into this book that I didn't really care because I was just loving it. I realized that this book may not be for everyone. It's a little bit of a slower burn in the first half. It's very character driven, and I could see that that time skip will not work for everyone. But despite its flaws, I really loved this one. I had such a good time reading, and when I got to a certain point in this book, I just couldn't stop. Like, I just wanted to keep going. Even though it is a little bit of like a longer book, I just didn't want it to end. And I love this world that we get to see and the atmosphere. And like, I was debating with myself if I should give this 4 stars because I think objectively maybe it's more there, but I am gonna give this 5 stars because I just enjoyed it so much. So I'm gonna go with what I feel instead of just what I think. And it is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, and I just thought it was amazing. The magical world and the atmosphere and the characters, it was all just perfect for me. It almost felt like this book was written for me, and yeah, not for everyone, but for me it was just it was like historical fantasy with fae at its finest to me. Well, maybe actually at its finest is a little bit of a stretch because Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies is really up there for me. But I feel like even though these books are very different, this has like a little bit of a similar vibe and a lot of the same elements that just made me love it. Even though it was a bit of a mixed month, I am very excited that I found 2 books that I absolutely loved and that I also really, really enjoyed Wildwood Dancing. So overall, I'm very pleased with my reading this month. Now, I would love to know what you all have been reading lately. Tell me all about it in the comments, and that was kind of it for today. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!